Colonel McGregor. I'm terribly sorry that we don't have you in vision, but Colonel McGregor on the line is worth 10 people in vision. So I'm very glad that you have been able to join us, albeit in this way. I'd like your analysis first, please, on what could possibly go wrong with the United States, Britain and France firing cruise missiles into Russia. How could that backfire?
Well, I think it's already begun to backfire. I'm afraid that the Russians, and specifically Mr. Putin and his inner circle, are frustrated at their inability to signal unambiguously to the West that they will not tolerate any more interference in Ukraine. From their standpoint, this war is effectively coming to an end. They would like to negotiate an end to it, straighten out whatever needs to be straightened out geographically, and work with a new government in Kiev. And we have decided that we're going to try and bully them, which is a serious mistake. They've now lowered the nuclear threshold to the point where conceivably they could respond with a nuclear weapon. But frankly, given the hypersonic missiles at their disposal, and they are clearly ahead of us in the West with regard to this technology, I think they could probably do just as much damage with high-end explosives on conventional missiles with hypersonic capability that they could with nuclear weapons. But I think we have to consider the high possibility that we could really be on the verge of war with Russia.
Well, it's clear to me, you'll know better in Washington, but it's clear to me that a bloc has been formed between the most belligerent of the NATO European governments and the last ditchers, the dead enders in Washington, to try and stop any possibility of Donald Trump being able to bring an end to this war. Is that how it looks to you?
Well, I think that's true. The problem right now is that President Trump has actually allowed people working for him to send mixed signals. He recently appointed a new deputy national security advisor, this man, Sebastian Gorka, and he has already said publicly that when President Trump takes office, he's going to threaten Putin with a rise in aid to Ukraine if he doesn't agree to end the war. If that's true, that would be sheer lunacy. Then I'm afraid that right now, Mr. Putin and his inner circle may decide that they have nothing to lose by effectively challenging us to a war before Mr. Trump even reaches office. In other words, the signals coming out of Washington are a mix of arrogance, ignorance, and frankly, stupidity. The Trump who months ago said, well, we need to stop the killing, seems to have disappeared in favor of some new macho man who wants to demonstrate that he's really in control. And the truth is, George, we are not in control, and we are not the nation of 91. We're the nation of 2024. Our forces are very different now, and they're not terribly capable, and we're not prepared to challenge the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, anybody to a regional war of any kind. And as you know, most of the world has turned against us because of our stance on Israel. As a result, I think we should be much more interested in coming to some sort of terms privately with the Russians that would put an end to this war in Ukraine. But instead, we have foolhardy people on all sides practicing public diplomacy in an effort to try to prove to everyone that they're tougher, better, smarter than their peers. The opposite, of course, is the case.
Well, you lead me into an avenue I was going to leave to the end, but it makes more sense to raise it with you now. And I do so with some circumspection because, the fat lady hasn't sung yet. Donald Trump hasn't got these weirdos in his cabinet yet. And I still have some hope that the likes of you may end up in that administration in one way or another, one capacity or another. But so far, so bad. it is almost beyond parody that he sends the guitar playing evangelical lunatic Mike Huckabee to be the ambassador to Israel. It seems incredible that little Marco Rubio, whom he showered with insults and who showered Trump with insults, should now be in charge of America's foreign policy. It's incredible that the new Secretary of Defense is a man who believes in the red heifers and the rebuilding of the temple, and who does not admit that there is such a thing as a Palestinian. And I could go on. Appointment after appointment after appointment has been disappointment after disappointment. How? Why? How did this happen?
I think we have to look at the sources of money and power that ultimately delivered the election for Donald Trump. And this is something that sadly characterizes business in Washington. You've certainly pointed to it to some extent in London. But in Washington right now, everybody knows where the money is. And the money is on the side of Israel, and as you point out, the evangelicals, but largely on the side of Israel and its agents here in the United States, who assembled enormous quantities of money and made it possible for him to win the election. So he's now hostage to his donors to a large extent. And I'm beginning to think that President Trump wanted desperately to be president as vindication for what he didn't end up with in 2020. But beyond that, I'm not sure how carefully he's considered everything. And George, any president who is heavily engaged with conflicts overseas, which is where we are now, usually fails miserably at home. And he has a very, let us say, ambitious agenda here in the United States. History tells us that you can't do both at once. You can do one or the other. And right now he's being dragged in the direction of widening wars both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And that doesn't bode well for the future. So I think a lot of people in the United States are already beginning to feel some sense of buyer's remorse, that he's not turning out to be headed in the direction that everybody had hoped for, which was peace, end the conflicts, and a return to focus on what's important here at home.
Well, let's turn to what may be about to happen. My sources tell me that the Iranian strike in retaliation for Israel's strikes, this would make it 3-3 in footballing terms, is imminent, might even be in the air. And it's promised that it will be of a new type and will be condign punishment. Should it be so, the United States and the United Kingdom are committed to sacrificing our own soldiers' lives. They've said so, in defense of Israel. And that could get very heavy promise indeed. If Iran hits Israel, are we into the feared regional war, all-out war in the region, from the Levant all the way to the Persian Gulf? And if so, how's that going to turn out?
I think we are, very definitely. Now, whether Iran strikes now or waits a little longer is unclear. To be frank, George, the waiting has worked in Iran's favor. The Russians, and to a lesser extent the Chinese and others, have built up very substantial integrated air defenses, added tremendously to Iran's military capabilities, particularly its missile arsenal. So Iran has really profited from the long pause. Israel has not. The situation inside Israel is dire. Their economy is in ruins. The population is gradually becoming demoralized. Some people say they are, but I happen to watch Israeli television. It strikes me that they are being fed a steady stream of disinformation and lies, much as we are in the United States and in the United Kingdom. So I'm not sure they realize just yet how dire their situation is. But Mr. Netanyahu has only one hope left, and that is that the Iranians do, in fact, attack him and attack him decisively at which point in time he can scream for help, and we still have substantial forces arrayed designed to do that. But it's also clear that the Iranians are prepared for it, and more important, that the Russians in particular are not going to stand idle if they do it. And with each passing day, it looks more and more like the Turks will move from bloviating to action, particularly in Lebanon, where the situation has gotten out of hand completely. A couple of million people are trying to leave the country and move to Turkey. The Turks have millions of refugees as it is, can't take any more. So I think you're right. If Iran strikes, I think what we have to reckon with is a regional war. And keep in mind that what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. That war, along with the Middle Eastern war, they will overlap. And we stand an excellent chance right now of coming out the losers on both ends.
Finally, Colonel, but it's a big finally. The ICC arrest warrants have now been issued months late because of British obfuscation and obstructionism, but they're now there. Netanyahu is officially wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's come to something when I can say that. The signatories of the ICC are obliged to carry out the arrest warrant, but your politicians, in particular Lindsey Graham, is openly threatening to crush is the word he used, the economies of Britain, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and other countries that will do their legal duty, feel that they must for fear of being prosecuted in their own countries. And Senator Tom Cotton in the United States reminded us all about the Invasion of the Netherlands Act, or I think it might be called the Invasion of the Hague Act. Perhaps Amsterdam would be spared and your forces would land only in The Hague. This kind of gangsterism, lawlessness, how bad does it make America look in your view?
Well, if we proceed along that road that you've just described, I suspect that almost everyone will become a member of BRICS. The European Union and NATO will simply vanish. Look, I don't see us carrying through on all of these threats. But what I do see is no effort whatsoever while the people in Washington remain who they are, that anything will be done about Israel. Frankly, they're paralyzed. And until the people here in the United States realize that I'm talking about the American people collectively, that they are suffering as a consequence. Their standard of living is falling, their economy is crumbling, the financial markets are tanking, and all of those things will happen if we get into this regional war in the Middle East. Once that happens, everything in Washington will change. There'll be a dramatic turnover. But for the moment, until that occurs, there will be no change. You know, I may have said this before, but a friend who was a Spanish general staff officer and worked with me years ago and at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, said, you know, Colonel, the United States is not a country, it's a planet. He's right. We very much live on our own planet, much as Britain used to before World War I. We are oblivious to all of the things that you were discussing, and it will only occur, that is, a change will only occur when it becomes clear that we are neither immune nor isolated or invulnerable.